The opinions shared by our guests today are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of their respective companies. They are here to share with us their experiences, expertise, and opinions acquired during the course of their careers from the companies and industries they have chosen to be part of over the years. One, please allow me to introduce our panel this morning. First off, please welcome Mr. Devraj Doss, Vice President, Region CFO of Finance and Planning for Philip Morris International. Now, Philip Morris is is a U.S. multinational tobacco company. Devraj himself has over 20 years experience with five global Fortune 500 companies spanning fast-moving consumer goods, industrial engineering, and pharmaceutical sector. Devraj, welcome to the show. He will be joined by Steve Zhang, CFO Asia Pacific SSP Group. Now, SSP is this time around a British multinational contract service food service company. SSP operates 2,800 brands, including Starbucks and Ajisen Ramen. Now, Steve is the lead of finance and IT functions for SSP Asia Pacific, and he is an integral part of the corporate expansion, resulting in the store's network growing to more than 200 stores around the region. Last but not least, uh, please welcome David Sim, Group Finance Director, Tamar Ship Management, an organization that manages a fleet of 42 vessels, mainly bulk carriers. David has over 20 years experience in public practice, financial services, and commerce. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to everybody here on the show. Let's get the ball rolling. Let me just switch off my screen sharing here so we can so the audience can see all of us. Okay. Now, as a reminder to our audience, please do post your questions on the Zoom platform's Q&A box, and we will make every effort to get these answered for you. So, now, okay, let's start on. For the CFO and finance function, David, if you could, what do you say will be the top priority this coming 2023?
Hi, morning, Alan. Hi, morning, other panelists and participants. Yeah, so 2023 seems like it's going to be a bit of a challenging one. You know, you've got inflation, possible recession, geopolitical risks. So there's a whole host of macroeconomic, shall we call it, uncertainties out there. But I think your Gartner poll you showed earlier on, Alan, highlighted one for me, and this is my view, which is the retention and hiring of staff. You know, we are living in a new normal. Hong Kong in particular, we're just beginning to open up again. Everything hopefully is going to get back to complete normal soon. But with that is the sort of realization from finance that we're not in this cocoon anymore, you know, and all the staff will start, you know, thankfully going on holidays and reassessing what's important for them. And a lot of the other polls that I've looked at, and a lot of the other readings that I've looked at, saying that compensation is no longer the sort of top driver anymore, whilst it's still important. It's all about flexibility. It's about what your company stands for, how your team is, and what the training's like. So for me, looking after your team is going to be one of my main priorities next year, amongst all the uncertainty in the world.
Thanks for that, David. Then we'll be covering more on that late at the last session for today. In terms of the biggest difference, Devraj, if I could ask you, if you look at the past 2020, 2020, up to this year, 2022, what would you say will be the biggest difference in the coming year, beyond the issue that David mentioned about still struggling with people issues?
Good morning. Good morning, Alan and my fellow panelists. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this panel today. And in fact, David, I think you laid it up beautifully for me to speak a little bit about and share my views on what I think will be different. So not repeating what David has said, which by the way, I completely agree with. I think, look, the way I see it is three main things would be different. The first is to really understand what is happening in terms of consumer trends, right? And let me explain this very quickly. We saw big shifts in consumer habits when COVID came about. You know, we all spoke about the new normal during COVID and so on and so forth. What is happening is a reversal. What is happening is a reversal of the trends that took place during COVID. I can give you an anecdote. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's very senior in Amazon, And she was saying that in certain categories in Amazon, they're seeing traffic and purchases and all of that actually reverting back already to the pre-COVID phase. Okay? So I don't think we've seen the end of this movie yet, and there's a lot more that's going to play out. And the reason why I picked that as a finance priority is because, look, our job number one is what? Resource allocation, right? And therefore, until and unless we get to the heart of how consumer trends are changing, how will we do our job of allocating resources in the best manner possible? So I think that's one thing that's going to be very different. The second thing, which I'm sure is number one in everyone's mind, is they're all linked, but they're all different in some ways, right? Is how do you deal with inflation? How do you deal with rising financing costs? And by the way, how do you deal with liquidity issues? We have a whole generation of CFOs who've not faced a liquidity crunch. It's not been there since 2008, right? Tells you how old I am. But how do you deal with all of that? Okay, so I really think that's going to be number two. And then if I can quickly finish off, I think the number three thing is going to be, this whole world of the expanding scope of the CFO. I don't know if my fellow panelists agree with me, but if I look at two specific topics, which is shaping and driving the ESG agenda in your corporation, and number two, shaping and driving the digital transformation agenda, what I see is more and more this is really falling in the camp of the CFO to make sense of all of this and to create a bit of a framework for the company to operate and navigate in, right? So look, I think for me, those are the three things that's going to be a bit different in 23 versus the last couple of years.
Thanks, Devraj. Now, if I could ask Steve there, who stayed quiet for a while now.
Mhm.
We always do things. There's always going to be something that we've been doing for the last few years, and it'll keep coming back every time because it's a problem issue that's recurring. In your view, if you could look at all the things that you've been responsible for the last few years, what is that recurring initiative that remains difficult to accomplish, but it's always there? You have to do it. You don't have a choice.
Yeah, definitely. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I would say is the margin improvement is always there. Yeah, no matter at which point of time, the margin improvement is definitely kind of one of the key for us, for everybody now in David, and everyone is kind of looking for margin improvement. Especially, I would say is after the post-pandemic period, a lot of things has been changed. So just now I hear that the customer, the behavior has been changed, the customer trend. Same with me. So my business is a restaurant in the airport. So, Hong Kong airport is still very, very quiet. So when the pandemic comes, so he hit us very, very seriously. So therefore, how the customer behave in the future, frankly speaking, I don't fully understand. So we need to know the unknown, or we need to understand more or invest some time on doing that. So say, for example, the business traveler, are they still, in the future, are they traveler like the traveling patterns like before, or they having Zoom like this one so that they have less traveling? So then we need to shift our focus and then our food offer, etc., to cater for all those things. So all these put together is still affecting our margin, etc. And the fact is, of course, the inflation, which will come on in a second, which the restaurant business is kind of a very labor-intensive one. So therefore, we need to hire the people, and then Hong Kong seems to be opening up, which is a good thing. However, the business in the airport is just not only about the Hong Kong passenger. And pre-COVID, I can give you an example that I think 30%, 40% of the travelers coming through the Hong Kong is actually coming from China. And China's policy right now, we still don't know how they're going to change their policy, still very close their border at the moment. So we need to kind of make some assumption. We cannot just wait and then wait, they open, and then we hire people, then it will be too late. Everybody has kind of ahead of the game already. So therefore, put it as a whole, the recurring initiative throughout the years, I think is still finding the ways to improve the margin eventually, but how is we need to understand what has been changed so far, which is know the unknown.
Yeah, the Hong Kong airport certainly has changed a lot from before the pandemic, and now it's still very quiet as far as the restaurants are concerned. Anyway, if I could ask David, over to you, if I could ask you, we highlighted several issues and challenges that finance professionals will be facing throughout the rest of the period. If you had to look at all the priorities that we're setting up for next year, what would be one challenge that finance leaders have to overcome in order to meet the priorities of 2023?
Well, I think touching on what Devraj and Steve have mentioned, it basically feels for all of us that we're going to have less resources and less time to do more, right? And we all have to figure out how to become more efficient and do more with less. So I think one of the kind of key challenges will be to stick to like the digitization plans, which I'm sure that all the companies are working on, because only with the robotics, APIs, big data, can we become more efficient? Can we help our staff do more with less? We can come up with advanced data and analytics to help make better and smarter decisions. So that can help your margins. That can also help the sort of timing for the processes. Yeah, so for me, it's balancing how you're going to maximize your resources, whether that is your people, or your time. So it's going to be a juggling act, I think, for the next 15 months or so.
Well, hopefully things will get better. If I could ask, there's for the and David, thank you for mentioning that one. It's a great intro for my next question for you guys. We've had digital transformation well before the pandemic. One of the key words that always come up in digital transformations, we want to be agile, whatever that means. Now, after 2 years of the pandemic, do you think the finance function today is agile and more able to change to market conditions? Devraj, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm probably biased because I'll probably say yes, right? But jokes apart, look, I think let's reflect on what we've learned and what we've achieved, right? And if we reflect on that, two things would really pop out in my mind. You know, the first is, for sure, we have learned to work in a much more digitally enabled and digitally driven manner. And you know, when I say that, I don't mean relatively simple things like we've all learned to work from home and virtually, you know, I'm not even referring to those things, right? But let me give you some maybe two very basic examples. Your month end, quarter end, year end inventory counts, right? We had like almost 2 years when people couldn't go into warehouses. Now, does it mean you close books without doing inventory counts? Of course not, right? So you found new technologies, right? You found virtual ways, you used a whole host of new technologies. And look, it was us, right? It was us as a function that was leading the charge to say, guys, we need to figure out an alternative, right? So I think we've really learned to use more digital tools in how we do our day-to-day job, if you will. And the second thing that I think we really learned how to do is to run much faster planning cycles with multiple variables. You know, when I started working, you did an annual budget and you did a kind of quarterly forecast update and you felt very good about yourself. Okay, again, one more indication of how old I am. But that's not how you operate these days, right? I mean, these days, it's not as if we are running a whole company forecasting machine every week. But you know what we all learn to do is to identify, what are the key variables, the top 3 or 5 variables that impact my business outcome. And these days, you're working with a range of outcomes on every single variable. And the relationship between them is not linear. It is not linear, right? So as a finance function, I think we've really learned how to deal with all of this, right? And just become so much more dynamic in how we plan for the business, how we forecast for the business, and then coming out of all of that, how we drive business actions. At the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? So I think that's the second thing that we've really learned how to do over the past 2 to 3 years. So if I look at those two things, I feel I would not be biased if I give us a bit of a tick and say, yeah, I do think we've learned to be more agile, more responsive, and all of that. I don't know how others would feel about that.
That's certainly we. By the way, we have a question that came in from the audience side. And again, thank you very much for posting those questions. And please, for our audience, please feel free to keep posting your questions. The comment that was placed here is, what's your outlook for China in 2023? And how do you think this? How do you update your portfolio to anticipate potential risk. Steve, would you be able to take that one on?
Yeah. I try to. It's a difficult one because as we keep, I'll say, is China is one part of our business definitely pre-COVID. It's a big part. We have to almost 70 to 100 restaurants in China in different airports, in Beijing to Shanghai to Hangzhou to Hainan. I think 6 to 7 provinces at least. When the COVID's come, and then of course the business has to be shut down, and then still now is the worst market in my portfolio in Asia Pac as of today, because of especially when this month they are doing the People Congress in China, so therefore they need to make sure, okay, everything is under control. So our guess is hopefully is after the People Congress there may be a little change, hopefully, ideally, yeah. So before that, I still believe they want stability very, very much until some point. Well, my opinion is why the China is still kind of close their border. I think globally there is some other uncertainties, like the war is happening, like the inflation in the US, all these will affect China. You know, the China population is probably about 1.4 billion, that big, okay? So in summary, talking about 2 to 3, I think first of all, they need to open their domestic first. Based on the experience, when you look back the experience, 2020 when it started the crisis, and then come to 2021 and 2022. If you just look at these 3 years, actually 2021 is better than 2020 and better than 2022. Yeah, if you look at the sales, domestic market, at some point of time when they control the pandemic to quite a good way, okay, in China market, I think their domestic market are quite strong. The international border is still closed, we understand, but domestic, the people is traveling. You can see some of the peak season, kind of the tourist spot is very popular. However, in 2022, I guess it's because, you know, the Congress is happening in this month. So therefore, I think they really need to make sure everything is under control. So it's a bad year. So my hope that is at least in 2 to 3, they can get back to a little bit like 2 to 1. So I think they will first to make sure that the domestic market is become back to normal, and then they will gradually start the international border. It still takes time. This is my view, and also some of the research done by the international market analysts thinking about maybe need to be raised second half until the border opening up to the other market. Yeah.
Well, with a large market size of 1.4 billion consumers, certainly everybody's looking at China, whether they're they're catering for China as a domestic market, or they're looking at China as an international market coming in. Thank you for that one, Steve. Now, speaking of surveys, a Gartner survey noted that 78% of CFOs that joined the survey plan to increase or maintain digital investments in the coming year. This is despite what all of you are talking about, the rising inflation. There's still the continuing uncertainty with the war and all that. Is this something, David, I'm going to ask you this, is this something you believe applies to your industry as well? And maybe Steve, if you could add to that one later, since you are coming from 2 very different industries. So David, let's start off with you.
Absolutely, if it applies to shipping and ship management in particular. If we're being completely honest with ourselves, the shipping industry was kind of late to the party. So we're still playing a bit of catch up, which is good in one sense, because then there's still a lot of room to grow and improve and a lot of efficiencies to be had. Personally at Tamar, we are probably about halfway through my sort of vision, digitization vision, shall we call it? That's easy for me to say. So I've already locked in with my CEO on board what we need as a sort of technology spend and change improvements, because we've built the business case, right? You know why we're doing this, and to scale our business. We're not going to be quite as big as Philip Morris or yourself, Steve, but you always have to look at where you're going to be, not where you're at the moment. And in order to do that, you need to get the best people, the best systems, and the best processes in place. And without that, then you're constantly going to be battling uphill, particularly amongst the times that we're living in as well. So if you can deliver value to the board and to the shareholders, then it's a win-win. So for us, digitization is in every step of my plans for the next 18 months.
Thank you for that, David. Steve, what about in your case? Is digitization a priority for the company, the group?
Yeah, always, especially the post-pandemic. One of the reasons is, again, is the inflation, labor intensive in our industry. So therefore, we need to find way to kind of hedge this kind of issue. So digital definitely help. Give you some example. Nowadays, I think it is quite common that you go to a restaurant, not all of them is still using the old ways to it. Most of them, they use a phone to make the order, and even the payment is coming through your mobile ordering. So therefore, this is definitely one part we need to roll out in all of our restaurants. And then in the future, talking about, you think of some of the hard copy, you see some of the receipt when you go out, check out, and then you pay the bill, you have the receipt. Actually, in some of the market, they don't have that one, maybe kind of a e-receipt or e-invoice. Why don't we can do it? Why don't we still need the hard copy of receipt? Actually, doesn't need it. So this kind of thing is kind of on one hand is cost. Secondly, is about the more steps in the process, you need people to handle it. Everything is digitalized, and definitely it will be helping a lot on that one. And then the digital manual and then self-ordering kiosks. So this is about the front line a bit. And so in some cases, nowadays it's talking about the unmanned store as well. That is not quite popular in Asia, but I can see quite some in the US, especially the supermarket. When you go in, there is no staff over there. You just pick what you want and then check out, and then put your basket in somewhere else, and they will automatically detect what you have. And then, even if they know you, if you are the member, then they can suggest you what you want to buy. So there are quite a lot of value-added service over there, and then you check out simply. So this is about retail. How can it incorporate into the business of F&B? To some extent, it can, but it's a non-journey. But long story short, is about how we can use tech, or we can invest on the digital technology to help us on all those stuff. And for back office, finance, everyone here, we have a lot of paperwork, process, etc. So we're looking at some, we so-called this RPA, which is the robotic process automation, okay, to replace the people. So it's a bit scary to some of the staff. Actually, they are doing the job like download from this website and then upload the number into this Excel, etc. So these kind of things we're trying to outsource to, or trying to investigate with some of the third-party vendor to have a solution. Okay, instead of a human being to do it, can it be kind of use a robotic system to do it, to go to somewhere else? It's a very standard one, and as long as it is a standard process, it has to be done every day, then kind of we use the robot to do it instead of a human being to do it, then it helps to kind of mitigate some of the inflation. So as a whole, then a lot of things, and then we invest quite a lot in digital side.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Okay, I have one thing that I need to ask Debraj here. We talk about gender representation in the finance function. Now, I'm sure at least with Philip Morris being a global international brand, you'd have a bit more parity there. But should we be encouraging, at least in this part of the world, or anticipating greater participation of women in the finance leadership roles, particularly? Debraj?
Thank you, Alan. Look, this one particularly gets me worked up, okay? And the reason why it gets me worked up is because, to me, it is not only about women. These days, gender diversity and everything else has become quite a big topic, as it must be. But I think we need to all step back and understand where this all starts from. And where this all starts from is from a bigger platform of diversity and inclusion. It is not only about gender diversity. There are multiple variables of diversity. And why is diversity and inclusion so important? Why has it become such a big topic? There is a societal aspect to the topic, which is responsible corporations. If we don't address who's going to do it, right? But then the second reason, which is a far more, I would say, practical business reason as to why this has become a big topic, is because when you're dealing with business issues, you want diversity of thought and opinion. You don't want one cookie cutter approach to every single problem, because then you miss out. And that's the here and now business case, if you will, for diversity and inclusion. And gender diversity and everything, everything that must be done about encouraging more female representation, to me, is a part of a broader platform. So that's frankly the big thing that I wanted to start with. Now, when it comes to finance, and Alan, you were spot on that, we're probably a little bit more blessed in the sense that the kind of business and the brand just attracts a bit more people, perhaps. But the challenges women face in the corporate world are very well documented. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of that. But if I bring the conversation a little closer home to Asia, my observations and experience so far has been that in finance, it's actually a little bit easier. More women study finance. It starts from there at the end of the day, right? And therefore you just have a bigger pool. And the fact that most of jobs are kind of office jobs as opposed to being in a factory shop floor or visiting 30 retail outlets trying to sell during the day, I think just lends itself a little bit more. Look, I can tell you in my organization in Asia, 61% of the people in finance are women. Okay?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I think it lends itself a little bit more, but where it becomes challenging is in senior leadership, right? And we know, again, well-documented reasons why you have organizations where you have fairly decent women representation up to a certain level of seniority, and then you kind of see the big fallout, right? And all of those reasons, all of those issues, and all of those challenges apply to us in finance as well, right? And therefore, we need to kind of take a look at the problem with a collective view, but also bring in a little bit of the functional lens, right? So, will we be better served with more women in more senior leadership roles? Absolutely. However, the discussion cannot stop at women. The discussion needs to go back to the basic of why we want diversity in the first place, right? So that would be my humble submission on this topic, Alan.
Thank you very much for that, Devraj. If I could bring the poll that we did right at the beginning, you can see the poll results on your screen there. The question that we asked our group here is, what would help finance leaders minimize disruption? And you can see here to our panelists, Devraj, Steve, and David, you can look at this. A larger proportion, over 50%, were voting on technology as can I say, they use the word salvation, okay, to minimize disruption. Second is better communication, and the last one is making workflow efficient. That caught me off guard. I would have thought that making workflow more efficient is part of the reason why we're doing all of this transformation. Anyway, if you could frame this setup, poll, okay, and now the question I asked to our group here, Steve, David, Debraj, what would be your advice to finance leaders, your peers out there, for them to be successful in 2023? Do they need to look at these three things here, or they should go somewhere else? Steve, let's start off with you.
I think so. Well, my advice is still be agile. Yeah, because I think all of us agree that the next year still be a lot of uncertainty. Yeah, the COVID has become less and less serious. However, you see the inflation, you can see the potential global recession, the war is still there. So this kind of stuff will be kind of noise to us, impacting our business whenever industry is. So be agile is kind of one of the key success factor. Find the pattern, the correlation between all of the issues I just mentioned. To me, to my business, definitely a lot of it means a lot to me about the event, what's the outcome of those events. And then to Alan, to your point, just now I can see technology is definitely one of the hot topic among all. And then also I believe that the technology can also help to make the workflow more easy. Okay, and then more transparent. So to me is we have running 200 restaurant in Asia Pac, and then you can think of 4,000, 5,000 frontline staff. So we need the data to be more kind of instant, and everybody can look at the sales, and then okay, sales can go up and down, because it's very difficult to guess the travel pattern. Not easy. Okay, this week is very high, next week okay they disappear. So we need to understand the powers of the business. So therefore, digital can play a very, very important part. That's my opinion.
Thank you for that, Steve. David, what about your view?
No, I absolutely agree with what Steve said as well. And in terms of the poll, that's the one I would have picked as well, technology, to make things smarter, because it impacts everything that we do on a day-to-day, right? Whether you're getting data faster, whether you're getting the analytics through to make smarter decisions. But if I can go in a slightly different direction in terms of like advice to finance leaders, and this is reflecting personally what I've done as well in the last year and a half, I would say, is to continue your education, your own education, whether that is in a new space or whether it's advancing yourself. I think sometimes we get lost in our day-to-day business, and we're always trying to help our companies, profit margins, help our shareholders, but you need to invest in yourself as well. So there's so many different courses out there, whether it's stuff on new big data technology that we don't even understand yet. I myself, I'm halfway through an MBA,
Wow.
something that I've wanted to do for a while, and I took the opportunity to do that last year, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And it sort of reinvigorates your mind, and the juices flow a bit more when you're talking to sort of different people. So yeah, just educate yourself and continue to improve. Person.
Thank you for that, David. Devraj, we're going to be closing the advice with you. What about you?
First of all, I could not agree more vehemently with David, and if I may just add on to what David was saying. So absolutely, it is about investing in ourselves and our individual capabilities, and also that of our teams and our organizations. One humble observation I'll share is, and back to the whole results on technology, is a lot of the technology implementations don't deliver the desired results because we put the hardware, which is the technology, but we don't put in the software, which is the skills and the people to run that technology. Okay, and there's always a bit of change management and all of that, right? So couldn't agree more with that, right? Then if I may add on one more, one more topic to that list, but that's not 2023. That to me is what I'm about to say is very intrinsic to us as a function, right? Which is, think first like an entrepreneur and a businessman. Then think like the CFO that you are. Too often we are just so caught up in our own world, right? And we think about our own metrics and our own processes, and we just lose the business. We just lose the business. And at some point of time, somebody's going to come and tell you, do you realize, we're trying to, we're in the business of selling more product to more consumers, and not all of this stuff that you guys are talking about, right? So think first like an entrepreneur, think first like a businessman, then think like a finance professional. And I really think if we adopt that mindset, each one of us, and everybody in every finance team and everywhere, there is so much more that we can do to contribute to the results of the business. There is so much more impact we can have as a function, right? So I would humbly submit that, Alan.
Thank you very much, David, for that. Spoken like a words of wisdom, okay, showing your white hair. Anyway, that about wraps up our first panel session for this morning. Devraj, Steve, David, as always, it was an honor and a pleasure to have all of you join our panel, our first panel for this morning.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Enjoyed it.
Okay.
The rest of the event.